Three Crosses family, welcome back to the podcast. Sitting in for AJ, the famous voice of the 3C podcast. I'm Patty Crone, if I haven't met you yet. I'm here on staff in the areas of care and equipping. So we're in the middle of our spiritual warfare series, and today we will be answering the question, how much access does Satan have to you, to me? So we'll be diving into Mark 5 if you want to check it out. And with that, let's go deeper. All right. Again, welcome back to the podcast. And with me today is none other than Pastor Danny. Hey.
Hey.
We get to do this again.
Thanks for having me on your podcast.
My podcast I borrowed for the day.
This is great. I'm excited to be here with you.
We should let our listeners know and watchers know that AJ will be back next week.
He will.
Yeah,
He will.
Father of 4 now.
I know.
4 girls.
I know. Have you met his baby?
What a gift. Only in pictures. And
Me too.
I don't know how he manages to have the most gorgeous babies. I think it's something about being on staff here because Theo,
Theo
our
just
director,
had a gorgeous baby as well.
Oh my goodness, she's stunning. So if you want a gorgeous baby, I guess you
just
need
got
to
to
come
work
on.
at 3 Crosses.
Yeah, just work at 3 Crosses.
That's one of the benefits.
That is one of the benefits. So anyway, glad we're here together. I think the only time we've done the podcast together, it's been you and I and AJ together.
Yes, this is it. We've got this.
So do you think
we can take the training wheels off? We can do this. We're going to have a great time.
We can do without AJ?
We
All
got
right,
this.
let's do it. All right. So I want us to talk about Mark 5, but I kind of want to back up and ask you a little bit more personally about this.
All right.
You started your sermon with how we can all sense something's happening in our life, something dark. It might be personal, it might be our family, it might be our faith. And we've wondered, is this something more than just life? Is there something out there opposing me? So I'm curious, because this is actually your sermon series, by the way. This was all Pastor Danny's idea, just FYI. When did you first start wrestling with this whole idea of a spiritual realm? And when did those questions pop up for you? And even how did your own understanding of warfare develop personally?
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably a slow awakening. As I feel ever since I started coming to church, people would talk about spiritual battles, spiritual warfare, and it was, it's always a thing that exists. You don't really know what it is. I haven't had a lot of experiences with demonic encounters. People have talked about casting demons out of people and all of that. But I think throughout my life, there's always this wondering, what is that? Right? So it's you talk to somebody and they've got some kind of manifestation of, is this mental illness, or do they have some sort of physical illness, or is this a spiritual thing that's going on here? Some stuff feels demonic, where you enter into a space and you're like, oh, this feels creepy, but is that just in my head, or is that real? So I think part of the journey for me was just kind of noticing those things. And I think holding loosely, I'm always a skeptic, so I'm not the one to jump into oh no, that's Satan, oh that's the spirit. I'm always well, there could be a natural explanation for this, but there could not be. And so I think me just having a personality where I know these aren't things that we can make dogmatic declarations about, these individual cases, just kind of helped me to hold these things in tension. And so I've had some experiences in my life where it's I'm praying for someone and there's some kind of demonic thing going on, it feels and so I'll just pray in that direction and if just trust that if this is demonic, God can take care of that. And if it's not, he'll forgive me for assuming it was or whatever,
I'm trying.
Yeah, so I don't feel I've gotten better at seeing spiritual things.
Yeah.
I think I've just gotten more okay with the fact that I know this exists. I don't know if it's even my job to diagnose things, but I think it is my job and our job as believers to be aware of these things, to know that there are complicated realities, that when we're talking to somebody who's going through a hard time, there might be some demonic stuff going on there. There might be a spiritual battle there. It's we don't want to discount that, but we also don't want to jump to conclusions and assume it is. And so, I think, like I said, I've had experiences with praying for people. I've had experiences in my own life where it just feels man, I remember a whole season in my life of just feeling there was what we talked about in the series, that Satan is described as the Lord of the Flies. It felt there was just these annoying
flies
thoughts
everywhere.
that would come into my mind around faith and doubt and all these things that like I just couldn't get rid of, but they were just so nonsensical. It just felt like they were outside of myself.
Kind of intrusive.
Yeah, they just felt like, I felt like swatting away, like they weren't like debilitating. They were just annoying. But the fact that they weren't debilitating, it's like I was able to kind of live in these two minds of like, well, I know I don't believe that. Why do I keep thinking that? Like, there's nothing. I don't doubt my faith, but I'm doubting my faith. Like, I don't. And so I think those experiences have just kind of formed my understanding of, like we've said in the series, these things are integrated. Sometimes things are physical and spiritual. Sometimes things are just physical or spiritual. And we don't necessarily need to diagnose these things, but we should be aware of them so that we can have a holistic response to what's happening in the world around us. Yeah,
I appreciate that. And then even like specific then to this question of how much access does Satan have to us as individuals? Has that morphed for you over time and through ministry?
Yeah, I think a little bit. We recommend a book in this series, 3 Critical Questions on Spiritual Warfare by Clinton Arnold. And he has a whole chapter devoted to, can Christians be demon possessed? And I was always taught, kind of based on Jesus' teachings, that no one can enter into a strong man's house unless he first binds up the strong man, that like, no, Christians can't be demon possessed. And Clint Arnold does kind of land on the same conclusion, but he does kind of open the book to say, you know what, like, yes, like our heart is Christ's home, but like if we invite Satan to come into Christ's home, he can come in because we invited him in. And so like there are cases where folks, either through like spiritual practices like seances and these things, or through sin in their lives, giving Satan a foothold, have invited the enemy into their lives. Like, yes, Satan can't just come and beat up Jesus and kick him out of our hearts, but like we talked about in the sermon, that Satan can have access to us if God allows him to, like in the book of Job, or if we allow him to in these different ways that we can. And so I think that chapter in that book was actually helpful for me to kind of understand the concept through the lens of all of the scriptures, not just kind of a quick glimpse at that one phrase of Jesus.
Yeah, and we'll unpack this more as we go, but I think that's a great setup for kind of where we're heading. And I think just even, this is a little maybe unorthodox for 3C podcasts, but I just kind of want to encourage those who are listening to think about their own story, even as they listen to us, and where they've sensed darkness in their life, and be open to the different possibilities as we kind of unpack all this, and just what was our sense of God's presence too. And I'll share maybe a story or two too of just when that darkness has come into my life personally, and then what is that sense of God's presence and where does that come in? Because I think that really sets us up for Mark 5. And I
do think it's important for us to just know, like, as we're trying to sense these things and navigate in these realities, all of these things that exist in the world are beyond our comprehension and outside of our control in many ways. And so my favorite story, I don't know if you have a favorite story about spiritual warfare, but one of my favorite stories about spiritual warfare.
Let's share stories.
It's not my own story, but
like ghost stories?
Kind of, yeah. So I was in Bible school, and the world missions professor was sharing a story about a friend of his who was on the missions field and called back to the States and said, I need some help because I'm trying to do ministry in this country. And I moved into this neighborhood. I want to reach my neighbors, but none of my neighbors will talk to me. And I finally found out why. My neighbor told me that no one in the neighborhood will talk to you because you have a demon on your roof and you refuse to get it off your roof. And I'm like, and the American missionary is like, well, I don't have a demon on my roof. I don't think I even believe there can be demons on my roof, right? And
there's a satellite dish.
Yeah. And so like he can't see a demon. All his neighbors are like, it's right there. He can't see it. And so he's like, this is silly. I don't believe in this. This is all just the superstition of this culture. We need to reach this culture. But no one would talk to him because they all were convinced he had a demon on his roof. So he didn't know what to do. So he calls back to our missions professor and says, what do I do? He's like, well, hey, there are things out there that are beyond what we can comprehend. Like not saying you should go get a witch doctor or whatever, because they were all telling him, go hire a witch doctor. Here's the person in our town who takes care of these things. He's like, it feels like a scam. And so he said, well, you don't have to go through their means, but like we do in our religion, believe in angels and demons and these things. And like, who knows? So just find someone that you do trust that can kind of help you navigate this. And so he calls another friend of his who was working in the same country. He's like, well, hey, let me just come to your house. Let's pray together. So he comes to his house. They go in the living room and they're just praying, God, if there's a demon on my roof, take it off. Right. And the guy just goes home and And he said the next day he comes out of his house and his neighbor's like, oh my gosh, you got the demon off your roof. And the other neighbor's like, oh wow, you got the demon off your roof.
That's an amazing story.
And he's like, and it just opened the door for all of this ministry in this community because I got the demon off my roof. He's like, I still don't know if there's a demon on my roof, but like they didn't know somebody came to my house. They didn't know we prayed. I do know we prayed and it was gone. And so it's just, I mean, I love that story because
it's a great story.
The guy is operating in a field that he can't see. He doesn't know what's going on. He does believe in it based on his faith, but he also knows there's all these competing worldviews in the country that he's in. And yet he just does what the Bible prescribes. He prays, he asks God. God apparently shows up and opens doors for him to do ministry. And so I do feel like this is a humbling topic because it reminds us that all of life is outside of our control.
Absolutely.
And all we can do is really just say, well, what does God invited us to do? Let's just trust that he can work through what he's invited us to do. Let's respond to him faithfully, that kind of thing.
And that's such humility. I just love the humility of, first of all, even the professor, but also the missionary to say, I love these people and whatever it takes. Whatever it takes to open that door, which to me seems to be, we can often forget in this, with start getting into this demon conversation, that the ultimate goal is to actually get to share the gospel. And sometimes there's darkness has to be pushed back to do it. But the goal isn't just to get rid of a demon. The absolute goal is to love our neighbors, right? And I think that's fantastic. So that's probably what I love the most about that story. So before we jump into Mark 5, I feel like this is a long drum roll to Mark 5. I do want us to kind of think about, and I might get your thoughts on the Old Testament to New Testament trajectory of evil. We really don't see Satan talked about all that much, maybe 3 incidences. We see tormented spirits for Saul, but we see Satan incites David to do a census. Satan tries to get to Job. I think there's one other time where in the book of Zechariah, Satan accuses the high priest Joshua. But like the entire Old Testament, we've got 3 times he's mentioned. And yet we get to the New Testament, and I mean, there's like 29 times I think I saw that there is speaking of demons or Satan. 26 are Jesus, which is really fascinating. So there's just this huge trajectory. It just seems like that as we move from Old Testament to New, it just builds momentum, the idea of warfare. So what have you seen as we, and then even leading into Mark 5 and the arrival of Christ, like what do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, I see that. I think as you look through the Old Testament, it's interesting. There is a battle. There is an enemy. Most of the time, the enemy of God's people are literal people. So it's like the Amalekites or the Philistines, or and so there's all these stories in the Old Testament.
Or Job's friends.
Or Job's friends who are somehow like cooperating with Satan in some way. And it feels like, on one hand, it's the same. Because really, when you read through the Old Testament, you start to see that these different foreign nations are all kind of systems of evil, where it's like there's child sacrifice, and you look at the Kings and the Chronicles, and like these kings and leaders in God's people who like put up all these altars to these foreign gods. Like that's all demonic worship too, and yet there is this idea that it seems like the battle in the Old Testament is against flesh and blood. Like it's not, but it feels like it is. Like you think of Joshua and like go into Jericho and take no mercy and get rid of everybody and claim this land for God's people. And it's interesting, it was moving in the New Testament. Part of that trajectory is Paul saying in Ephesians 6, like our battle's not against flesh and blood, and it's against these invisible forces. And so part of that kind of helps us look back at the Old Testament and see that these battles of the Old Testament are not against people either. There is this spiritual battle that's taking place, but where you see it is on the literal battlefield. And there's so many stories in the Old Testament where we've talked about them in the series, where God opens the eyes of his people to see
Elijah's servant,
an integrated reality of like there's a spiritual and physical battle happening at the same time.
Yeah.
It feels like as we move into the New Testament, we see that the spiritual battle continues, but it's almost decoupled from this physical battle, where it's not like an integrated battle where we're battling against humans and the demons that they worship, but we're battling against demons in a sense.
Like they've taken the gloves off almost.
Yeah, and and I think, a lot of it is the trajectory of Old to New Testament in general, where we talked about that a little bit today as we were kind of prepping for this, is this kind of localized, like God's people in this place, in this temple, this is where we worship, and all these foreign nations are evil. And now there's this gospel that like
Goes
it's
out.
going to go out to the whole world, and there are going to be people coming to faith in the midst of all these foreign nations. So there's no longer these clear lines of like
That's an interesting point.
like who's good and who's bad. It's like, well, God has people in every nation now, and he's trying to reach all the nations and redeem them from the inside out. And so there is just a difference of posture of how God's plan and people are moving throughout the
Into
globe.
enemy territory almost.
Yeah, and it's like we're almost like this Trojan horse mentality of like God is going to put up his people inside these foreign lands
Yeah.
and reach the people from the inside, like we see glimpses of in the Old Testament, Babylon, and these things. So it does feel like it's almost like Jesus is preparing. Okay, on one hand, he's opening our eyes to some things that maybe we hadn't quantified as much before his ministry. But then also, he's also changing the trajectory of where God's people are going to go, where now it's like, we're going to go out into the world, not to destroy the enemies of God's people, like the Amalekites and the Philistines. We're going to go out into the world to demolish the strongholds that the enemy has on people's hearts. But they're going to come to
Individuals.
faith in the midst of their community. We're not going to slaughter everyone in their community.
Right.
And so there is a bit of a changing of posture towards, I think if you were to ask, like, what does evil look like in the Old Testament, you would talk about the people groups who are doing evil. What does evil look like in the New Testament? It's like, oh yeah, it's sin, it's Satan, it's, it's these concepts and structures and evil things. And so
It almost seems like it becomes more personal, goes from cosmic, and it kind of drills down into, as individuals, of course, the community is a huge piece in our vulnerability and the good use of community. But it does seem like Paul works really hard to remind us that, he's looking for someone to devour. Like it's not a people group anymore. But I love that picture of going out, because I do think that connects to Mark 5 beautifully, and that Jesus is in like Gentile territory with Mark 5. But what's happening in Mark before we get to 5, and then I'll finally read it.
yeah, Jesus is starting. Mark is a book that keeps moving, right?
It's
And so
fast.
it like
Go, go,
starts
go,
out,
go.
he's like in a solitary place, and then he's doing ministry in that place, and then boom, he's out and he starts healing people. He's casting out demons. He's healing folks who are experiencing physical illnesses and deformities and things. So he is like, the kingdom of God is at hand. He's doing all this great work. And at the same time, opposition is starting to rise, mostly from the Jewish religious leaders who are saying things like, oh, he's casting out demons by the prince of demons. Or kind of the question is like, where does he get the power to do all these things? Is this a power he has from God, or is this a power he has from the enemy? And so the spiritual conversations are actually started by the enemies of Jesus, who are saying, no, he's doing all these good things in the power of Satan. And so his teaching on these things is a response to some words that are coming against him.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, this is actually, as we get to Mark 5, it's the third time Jesus has cast out demons, but the first time in a Gentile territory, which is really cool. And it's coming off of the silencing the wind and the waves, which is super interesting. He's with the disciples, and they're like, who is this that the wind and the waves obey him? And then there we go into this. So I'll just read this for us, 1 through 15. The disciples came to the other side of the sea, to the region of Gerasenes. The Gerasenes?
I think you're right.
Okay, well, we'll go with it with confidence. As soon as he got out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs and met him. He lived in the tombs. No one was able to restrain him anymore, not even with a chain, because he often had been bound with shackles and chains, but had torn the chains apart and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran, knelt down before him, and he cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God, don't torment me." For he had told him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." "What is your name?" he asked him. "My name is Legion," he answered, "because we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the region. A large herd of pigs was there, feeding on the hillside. The demons begged him, "Send us to the pigs so that we may enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. The herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned there. The men who tended them ran off and reported it to the town and the countryside, and the people went to see what happened. They came to see Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting there, dressed in his right mind, and they were afraid.
Wow.
Yeah, you preached on this. Go, Danny. wow. So you pointed out in the sermon that Jesus himself doesn't call the man possessed, and I felt like there was a great emphasis in sermon discussion as well about this understanding of the difference between, like, where did this word possessed come from? Although they assess it that way, but that's not what Jesus says. Why is there a distinction between, we use the word demonized versus demon possession? I think that's a good place to start.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say it's semantics. It's literally semantics. It's all just how words work. But the Greek word is, I think it's daemonizai or something like that, which is demonized. And so the word possessed didn't come out into the Latin translation of the Bible called the Vulgate.
Because mine even has a little quote, like, it doesn't have to be that word. It's
really
interesting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so possession is more of a Latin word that comes from that Latin root. It's like possetio or possessio or something. And so that's right. It's semantics. And so it's like partially is demon possessed is how the translators of the Greek New Testament into Latin decided how to express that in their native language.
It.
Like he was possessed by a demon, right? Because if they said he was demonized, he would be like, well, what does that mean? Right? It's like, but I think the reason that it's important is we talk about possession. We talk about things like ownership. We talk about things like, being trapped by something and being owned by something. Right. And so you don't want to put words in the mouth of God where God doesn't say any of those things. That's just what the thoughts that we have when we hear that word. And so kind of going back to that root word of demonized, it's like demonized reminds me more in my English vocabulary of like being terrorized by demons, which feels a little more accurate. Like this guy didn't feel like he was just like one of Satan's possessions.
No.
It feels more like he was being tormented, like ripped apart from the inside by these demons that are going after him. And so that's why I think that it's helpful to kind of talk through these terms, because I think demon possession feels very static. Like, well, now you're one of the demon's possessions and you're owned by him, and it's like you're his slave. Doesn't even seem like the lived experience of this Gerasene demoniac. It seems more like someone who's just being torn apart mentally, physically, all of those things by whatever is inside of him. And the two images I got as you were reading that passage, one was, you mentioned the calming of the storm. It's like, man, you think of the storms raging in the Sea of Galilee. It's like that's happening inside of this guy. It seems just like ripping out of chains. And
they thought the sea was evil. So it's just even that picture.
Well, and even, and then the other picture I got, this is just a funny one not funny, but from YouTube. I watched this video yesterday of a truck, like a monster truck, like a big diesel truck that had a leak in the oil that started mixing with the gas. And so the oil starts combusting. And when the oil starts combusting, it creates this like chain reaction where now the truck just revs up more and more and more more until it finally explodes. Ooh. And so I was picturing that truck while I was thinking about this guy's life, where it just feels like there's something inside of him that's just combusting and it's just getting worse, and you can't shackle him anymore. And it's like, until he finally is going to explode, like these demons want to torment him. And so it doesn't merely feel like he's possessed. Like it feels like in terms of he's owned, it feels like he's being tormented. He's being tormented. He's demonized in the sense that like he's terrorized by these demons or affected by these demons. They're doing stuff to him actively. So I think that's why I prefer demonization to demon possession, is it feels like active versus static. And that kind of fits what's happening in the text, and it's the Greek word. But
to me, it even elicits maybe even more compassion in a sense. In Luke's account, I've always found this super fascinating. In Luke's account, in the same chapter, I think it's Luke 8, he has Mary Magdalene. He introduces Mary Magdalene and the women who were following Jesus and providing for the ministry. And he says, in whom Jesus cast out 7 demons. It's in the same chapter as Luke's version. So it's like, is this actually to Mary's experience? Is that what because 7 often is a perfect number. She could have been fully possessed like Legion. And the idea of that storm, I like that picture that you connecting it to the sea. And it I don't know, for some reason there seems to be more even compassion, but I just think of someone being demon possessed, like you said, so the demons just own that person.
Yeah, it's like we've lost them. It's like, they're
no longer part of us. And and it's anyway. I think what's also fascinating to me is and this is where we're going to get into some of that crazy satanic panic stuff maybe of the 90s, but Jesus doesn't use any kind of formula. He just simply commands. And
he commands, but he also seems to negotiate.
Isn't that bizarre?
Like where it's like they're pleading with him. He's like, okay, right. It's like, so I do feel like he is absolutely in control as he negotiates, but it's a little bit crazy.
What is he trying to teach us, I wonder, in the negotiation? And I even found it fascinating that he wants to know their name. And, scholars are all over that of like, well, the demons are afraid if they tell him their exact name, he'll have more power. But of course he doesn't. He doesn't need their name to have power, which I think is interesting when we get into some of the exorcism stuff and trying to name demons. But he just, they just flee really in his presence. They know they're in the presence of the Son of God. And so just something about his proximity, like what do you think about that as you even picture that?
Like Jesus' proximity?
Yeah, is it something about his proximity? I heard somebody recently say something that I'm chewing on, and maybe this isn't accurate, so you can correct me, but I'm just sitting in that. We often teach God can't be in the presence of sin, and so it heaps all this shame on us that the minute we sin, God is gone. But it's really that sin can't be in the presence of God.
Yeah, that's great, yeah.
And so that's shifted a lot for me personally, and then even as somebody who does care. But is that maybe also true when it comes to the demonic? God can be in the presence, evil can't be in his presence. Yep. He can be in its presence. And so I don't know, I just started picturing like, we can't even be in your presence.
Mm-hmm. And I think, there are passages in the scripture that we use to develop an argument that God can't be in the presence of sin. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the same kind of unhelpful Bible study that we do when we say like, well, a Christian can't be demon possessed because of the strong man passage.
Yes.
It's like, you're jumping to conclusions based on this little passage.
Yes.
That it's like the principle is true, that like you can't mix evil and righteousness.
Right.
But then when you look at kind of the actual experience of what happens here in this encounter, you actually get to see how that works mechanically, where it's like, well, on one hand, God can be in the presence of sin. He comes near sin, and it's like when light comes near darkness, darkness scatters, like a magnet almost, like pushes it away. At the same time, you kind of wonder, the demons start activating like their terror when Jesus casts them out. Right? So it's Jesus, the first thing that we hear is this, what do you have to do with me, Son of God? But it says, because he had said, like, get out of him.
Get out of him.
And I almost wonder, it's like, you're whatever, like you're sitting on a park bench and somebody like picture like an old timey burglar with like the mask and whatever walks past you. You're like, oh my gosh. Like, is this guy going to burgle me or whatever?
Burgle? Yeah. I love that.
and I almost feel like this is like the role reversal of like, can Jesus walk past this guy and the demon's like, oh no, don't make eye contact.
Yeah,
like,
and he can pass us by.
And then he stops, because a lot of times you see Jesus stops and then he addresses someone. And it's almost like the evil thing that's invading someone's space or sanity is like just kind of keeping their head down, hoping Jesus doesn't make eye contact, so to speak. But then Jesus stops and addresses, and it's like, okay, there's about to be a power encounter here that the demon is not going to win. And so now it becomes this negotiation about like, how can I leave this person? Like, don't torment me. Is like, how are you going to do it? Don't send me out of this region, right? All
that
these
whole
like,
region thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother, maybe it's this conversation, but a whole nother part of the conversation at least. And so I don't think it's as black and white as like Jesus and a demon can't be in the same room because they're like oil and vinegar. It feels more like Jesus is not going to entertain evil, like participate in it. Jesus has all power over evil. And we know like God overlooks evil from time to time and allows us to be in sin, allows terrible things to happen, right? It doesn't mean he is hiding or he's not present there. But then other times it's like he engages with evil, he's going to win. Like it's
that is interesting.
You kind of see that in real life played out in this story.
Yeah, because we recognize or we have that Jesus did not heal everybody. That came anywhere near, anywhere he was walking through a city. Not everybody was just all magically healed. So I didn't really think about that in terms of even demonic torment. That not everybody had torment removed from their lives.
Yeah, he wasn't like he walks through a town and everyone is demon possessed. All of a sudden, their demons all jump out of them because Jesus walked by, or
Which again, something about his mission and his compassion, and this is one he heals that he wants to go tell. It might be because it's Gentile territory instead of Jewish territory, but while the demons have stayed in the region, so has this healed man with a message, which is really interesting. But
Well, and I wonder, like, what happened to the demons after the pigs died?
right, because they got to stay in the region.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, and they just
Like, are
inhabited
they just at the
somebody
bottom
else.
of the lake now, or did they leave the pigs when the pig? I'm assuming they leave. I don't know how that works.
Yeah. Well, now we know there really were thousands,
Well,
right? Because
and
they entered thousands of pigs.
Well, and it also makes me think, demons can enter into these animals and they kill them instantly. It's almost like, you look at this man who has all these demons inside of him. Like, humans seem more resilient and strong in that sense, where it's like, this guy didn't die instantly when the demons took him over. He
But
didn't
the
kill
animal
himself
did.
instantly, but the animals did. And that just breeds more compassion for this person. Like, how much torment
It'd be easier to be
would
dead.
be over, where it's just like, if this thing happened to, 300-pound, I don't know how big pigs are, animal next to you, it would die. But you've got 2,000 strength of this thing in you, and it's just tearing you apart from the inside.
The resiliency, because we can see where there's lies that have led to suicide for some people who are battling. But it seems that what the demonic is trying to do is just distort and destroy the image of God. So the pigs are a creation of God, but they're not in the image. And so maybe there's something about us being image bearers that brings that resilience and brings that power to not be overtaken in the same way as a pig. But
And I think, the compassion word is big, because I think part of it, you wonder, like, well, how did this happen to this guy?
how did it happen?
And
I do not like the assumption that he sinned.
you don't know. Like, it doesn't say.
Could be, but I don't want to assume.
No, no. But I
there's
think
probably a million factors.
Well, yeah, and it just feels like, I think if we have a view, I'm thinking this guy's outside of the camp. He's returned to his family, but then everyone's like, now tells Jesus to get out of here. They're not happy that this guy's been healed. Like, that actually maps with real life experience. Where
They
it's
lost a lot of money in those pigs.
That's true. So there is like a farming incident.
There's a
that
farming
happens.
2000. Yeah.
But I also just think of, like,
bankrupt a city.
in like real life, it's like you've got, say it was a sin trajectory. Like, you've got a child that goes off the deep end, gets caught up into drugs, and it's like, and all of a sudden, like, gives access to the enemy. Now he's terrorized, like, living on the streets, like these different types of things. I don't think we have compassion as a culture for that person. Generally, I think it's like, well, this person just kind of walked off the path and they made dumb
Kinda
decisions.
invited it
and
all
they
in.
And it's like, we don't think about the demonization of this person. We just think like, well, no, this is a person who's made bad choices and now they've gone crazy because they've done too many drugs and it's fried their brains. We say stuff like that. But when you look at this text from Jesus' point of view, it's like, well, we don't know anything about the backstory. We don't know what happened. There's no culpability there. It's not like, but the reason this happened was this.
Right.
All we see is that Jesus approaches this guy and he sees him in his pain and Jesus has healing for him. And, and I just think it's like we said at the very beginning. I think it's important for us to see that these things are integrated, because when we don't, we're either going to think that everything's spiritual. And so we're going to walk down the street and just be casting demons out of people and whatever. Generally, is probably not going to work because that's not how God has prescribed us to do things. Or we're just going to assume, oh, no, they earned it. This is not a spiritual thing. It's a physical thing. It's a mental thing. It's a drug thing. But the fact that like this guy has a backstory that's integrated with his spiritual reality at some level, whatever it is, Jesus doesn't even address the backstory. He just addresses the kind of where he lands. And it's interesting, like encountering Jesus and having these demons removed from him, he comes back into his right mind. So like, even though there's a chance that this is integrated with a lot of other things, the spiritual thing is solved. It almost like solves a lot of the other things.
It does.
Where, not to overly reduce it, but like people that we know in our church that have gone through so much and then all of a sudden they've been healed by Jesus. It doesn't solve all their problems. Right. But in a sense, it solves all their problems.
It's pretty dramatic though. I mean, to be clothed in his right mind and to want to follow Jesus is like all conversion language, right? So he is a new creation. He's completely changed. And it's interesting because we don't even get a whole lot of, now don't continue to sin. Like sometimes we see that when Jesus heals. Now do not sin or something worse will happen to you, or your faith has made you well, or we just see he's clothed in his right mind and he wants to be a disciple.
Yeah. And you think too, we talked about Old Testament, New Testament context. It's like pigs are unclean animals in the Jewish community. This is a community where they're farming. Like there's a lot of messed up stuff happening. It's like, no, how come this guy's demonized, but these farmers aren't demonized? Like,
Well, and how come this guy gets saved and nobody,
Yeah, exactly.
well, he's going to be a missionary now.
He's going to be a missionary to his culture.
Great.
But it's like, it's interesting. Jesus comes in and addresses this person who's in deep despair and pain. But there's all these people in sin in his community, like to the sense that they're kicking Jesus out when he's doing miraculous things.
Which we do see that play out in different contexts. But I think the other thing that's super important, at least for me, as we start talking a little bit more about entering into enemy territories, is the whole purpose was for him to be redeemed. It was the purpose of these demons being commanded out of this man was so he could be clothed in his right mind and become a messenger of the gospel. It wasn't a show. It wasn't so even that's where I saw a lot of things go sideways. I'm old enough to be around from the satanic panic of the 90s. It became a power trip, and it became an end in itself that we need to get the demons off of roofs, and we need to, it wasn't to evangelize the neighbors. And I think that's where we can get really off. And isn't that even from last week's passage with Austin Payne of do not rejoice, but rejoice that your name is written in the book of life. It seems like Jesus is really intentional about let's stay on mission. This is part of the mission. This isn't the mission itself. And but man, we can just get into that power trip, or we're fearful. I mean, there could be a million motivators, but I do love that, as you were bringing this down to like discipleship for us too, that you remind us that faith in Jesus is the actual protection, for those of us who are believers and are wondering about this access. What does that look like practically though, like in terms of fear and confusion? So 2 a.m, I wake up and I'm having a panic attack about my kids or whatever, or I'm getting into a heated discussion with somebody at work in the afternoon, like this whole idea of personally protecting ourselves from even inviting evil. Does that make sense? You said faith in Jesus.
I think, well, on one hand, I think there's a lot of superstition, right? So most of the time when I talk to people who are fearful about inviting Satan in, it's through like mundane things that aren't connected with what we're talking about, right? So it's like, oh, I just found out that, I don't know, like my daughter brought home this stuffed animal from a TV show that my friend told me is a demonic TV show. And so I think there's a demon that came into our house through this stuffed animal.
Gotcha.
And it's like, okay, that's not what inviting Satan into your house looks like, right? It's, if somebody came to me and said, oh my gosh, my kids were all trying to do a seance and conjure up like dead people, it's like, well, that's a little more of a
we might want to talk.
Real thing. Let's talk through that. But a lot of these are like tokens and superstitions and Christian superstition and all of this, that's not what we're talking about. What we talked about in the sermon is that the 2 places that Satan can have access to us are if God gives him access or if we give him access.
If we give him.
And I think the God gives him access is another scary topic, right? Which comes out in a lot of different ways. We talk about nothing can come to you unless it goes through the hands of God. Like, well, what about the suffering in my life? It's a similar concept. But then us inviting him in, we'll talk a little bit about next week when we talk about the armor of God. But I think there's an invitation. Like, you go and try to conjure up a demon or you try to pray to Satan. That's not a good idea.
Right.
That's inviting Satan into your life. But also see this idea with the armor of God. It's like you take off the righteousness of Christ, you take off truth, you start believing lies, you start entertaining untruths. This is not like you're asking Satan to enter into your life, but it's like if Satan's bringing lies into your ear and you start to entertain him and have a conversation with him about it or with yourself about it or whatever it is, it's like that's just a dangerous place to be. And so there is this like resist the devil and he will flee concept from Peter, where it's not your job to go fight the devil, right? But part of it is like, hey, he's going to throw these lies at you. He's like, take every thought captive, make it obedient to Christ. Like, that's not true. I'm going to stay, I am secure in Christ. So whether it's lies or it's, or sinful activities, it's like keeping short accounts with God. Seems to be the 2 categories, like fear and temptation. Yes. Right? Yeah.
They seem to be the 2 big categories.
Yeah. And I think the temptation, it's like, temptation comes our way again. Stand firm, run, flee from temptation. Don't
Which is basically the categories of suffering and sin. Oh, duh. The 2 big categories of life in a broken world.
We're culpable or someone else is culpable.
Yeah.
And so it's like, in a perfect world, we don't sin. And when we don't sin, we're not giving Satan access to a part of our life to grow this seed of sin more. But in the world we live in, we do sin. And so I think we see a remedy for sin in the New Testament and Old Testament as well, of like, when we confess our sin, God is faithful to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so there is this keeping short accounts of realizing, well, again, we'll talk about this next week, but when we do sin, it's like, oh, I've placed myself in a place of vulnerability. I need to come to the Lord and say, hey, I need help here. In the same way that like a child, they mess something up, like, you break the water faucet in the house and now there's water pouring in it, where if you ignore it, your house is going to flood. You go to your parents, be like, oh my gosh, look what I just did. It's like, they can fix it.
They can turn it off.
They can turn off the water. And so I do think that's the remedy is not sinning, although that would be great. The remedy when we do sin is to confess our sin and experience forgiveness. And it's almost like if we've opened up a hole in the side of this boat and now water's pouring in, when we confess our sin, God plugs the hole again and allows us to be secure. So,
and even ministers to us, like mercy. I always conceptualize mercy as this ministry to my conscience and my guilt and the shame, that he doesn't just remind us you're forgiven. There's a comfort and a presence that, so I do really love that part of the sermon, of just really sinking our teeth a little bit more into our vulnerability. And so I'd love for you to even say more, our responsibility to resist the enemy related to vulnerability.
Yeah, I think,
you talked about confession, repentance, and I think suffering's another big category. So I was just wondering if there's more you want to say on that.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of this weird tension is resisting doesn't sound vulnerable in a sense, like resisting in many ways is the opposite of vulnerable, right? So it's like, if someone's going to punch you in the stomach, if you like flex your abs, like you resist and they can't punch you, but if you like let down your guard, they can knock the wind out of you. So part of the resisting the enemy is like this lack of classic vulnerability of like you put up a shield, like the armor of God. This is like a non-vulnerable armor. On the other hand, part of the tension of all this is there's a vulnerability in all of this as well, especially as it comes to whether it's our sin or our suffering. Like part of the enemy's tactic is isolation, and it's like you fall into sin. That's a time to be vulnerable and come before the Lord and say, I've messed up. Come into our community, man. I've messed up. And to bring this vulnerability so that healing can come. And I think it's important that's like, well, we resist the enemy, but if we let down our guard and the enemy comes into our life, or if the enemy comes into our life through just like suffering and it's not our fault, it's like there's a vulnerability there of like, if you mess up, being strong and just powering through it, that's not how to solve it. Like
hiding it.
Yeah. It's like,
or resolving to never do it again.
Right. It's just, and that's what we see in terms of patterns. And sometimes that's what the enemy does to people to get them into these cycles is it's just like, I'll never tell anyone about this. Like, I'm just going to do better next time. Like, just, you make a promise to God, like, I got this.
Kind of some penance here and there.
Yeah. And what you need to do is more of that like humble vulnerability of like, man, like I've messed this thing up. And so that's where we have like two battles being waged at the same time. We have the enemy who's trying to like enter into our lives through our sin. And we also have us who are terrified that like, well, what if our friends find out that we're messed up people, or God finds out I'm a messed up person?
Yeah.
They might not like me. He might not like me. I'm just going to power through this. But that's like vulnerability becomes the remedy in terms of confession and repentance and openness.
I found a really fascinating thing happen. I worked at a counseling center for missionaries and leaders, pastors that had a lot of times it was moral failure, sometimes it was suffering. I was the only pastoral counselor, biblical counselor. Everybody else were therapists, social workers, psychologists. And what we found, it kind of became a little scratch their head. Why was Patty getting all these confessions? I was like, I must be like a nun or something. I don't know. Everybody wants to confess to me. But what I saw that was so beautiful is I think there's something in us that wants to confess, but we don't know who's safe. And we don't know, maybe we've been taught some things. But I do think that natural tendency all the way back from the garden is to hide and to lie and to point fingers. But I do think there is a part of our soul that actually aches to get something out of the dark. And I was always in such awe when I would hear these confessions and some pretty awful stuff to have to confess. And I just want to take a minute to just thank you. Our for those of you who know, our staff meeting today was on this very topic. And Danny was really encouraging us as a staff to to be people who confess and to be people who are safe for others to confess. Because when you're in ministry, it can be even more tempting to hide. And that's what I loved about these missionaries and pastors that would confess what was really happening. They would come with a reality. Maybe it was adultery or it was some major moral failure, but usually there was a lot of things that hadn't been confessed yet. And so, but we just saw how much healing happens when the confession actually comes. So anyway, I just want to thank you and appreciate that this is a place where we're not just asking our people to be people who confess. We're seeking to be that for each other and to be that as a staff. I just think it's so important. That's where the suffering and the sin both kind of feeds the lies. When we don't confess, then the lies just multiply. Either the lies we're hearing from the enemy and then also our own lies, right? That we're telling ourselves and we're telling others. But I also saw it as a counselor too, and in church ministry, the suffering, the lies that come in with suffering too. And so that doesn't seem as simple as confession. That seems a little more complicated in some ways. My own trajectory with our daughter was believing the lie that somehow Aubrey was a punishment when she was diagnosed with disability. And we even had Christian friends say, what have you done wrong? What is God trying to teach you? If you just had enough faith, she'd be healed. All those kind of horrible things. So sometimes we don't need our own lies. Sometimes we don't need the enemy. That's what I told AJ today in the office. I'm like, I just realized Job's friends were an instrument of Satan. You think of the natural disasters that took his kids and the marauders that stole everything he had as being instruments of Satan, but you don't think of his friends who accused him. Anyway, side note, but we've had that in our lives. So to me, it seems a little trickier in bringing people into our suffering too. But I do remember in some of my training, I had a professor of my favorite. He would always say, where you see suffering, watch for Satan's lies. Watch, because we try to make sense of our suffering in some way. And sometimes it's easier to believe the lie that I did something wrong to cause all this, because then I can not ever do it again. And then my life won't be hard. And there are some times that we're suffering because of sin, but it does seem like the role of community is critical in not just hearing confessions, but moving towards people who are suffering and asking them the question, what sense are you making of this suffering? What are you believing? I find people are really ready to tell you, and that's how we can minister to each other too. Maybe not beat each other up with that's a lie, but at least help them entertain the bigger story. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you see that with suffering?
And I see that suffering it goes both ways. Like sometimes people are experiencing suffering and it's like, I must have done something to deserve this. And other times people experience suffering and it's the same kind of thing of like, well, I'm just going to hold it all together. I'm going to show that it's not affecting me because what are people going to think of me if they think that I'm like questioning God in the midst of my suffering, And so it's the same thing with sin, right? Where with sin, it's like you either deny it or you just kind of white knuckle through it. Suffering's the same thing where it's like you take, and with sin, you should take ownership. Right. Suffering, it's like, well, you didn't own this. Like, and I think part of what's hard, especially like Job's friends and our friends, it's like there's a tension in the scriptures. I think of James 5 that talks about if anyone's sick, they should go to the elders of the church, receive prayer, and if they've sinned, like it'll be forgiven. It's like I do think there is an integration between our sin and our physical selves and all that. And it's like, so when you've got good friends, part of what they need to do is kind of help you wrestle through, like, hey, is there a way we can help diagnose this? Is there sin in your life? Is there, it's very hard to do that in a healthy way. Sure. I've had those same comments from people about things that have happened in my life, and it's like, okay, well, that's silly and not helpful, and not, whenever those comments have been made, it's not someone trying to do this in a good way. It's them doing that in a bad way. There's
a little pride going on there, or fear.
It's just like, or again, like that superstition.
Or like, superstition.
In their mind, it's like, oh, well, it's less of the integration of all things and more of this like cause and effect of like, well, you mess up, God's going to punish you. It's like God's just like a nun with a ruler going to slap your wrist or something, or slap your knuckles or something. I think it's
the third category of lie I see though in suffering too. I was just thinking about this when we were talking is I've often heard God is betraying me because I didn't do anything wrong. And this whole idea that this lie that I think Satan perpetuates, that God doesn't want you to suffer, that, not a good theology of life in a broken world. And you didn't deserve this. And I remember when Aubrey was diagnosed, we were in a life group with a bunch of couples. We had been doing life for a number of years, and one couple kind of went off the rails, and they just said, if this is what God does to people who love him, is give them a severely disabled child, I don't want anything to do with God. Wow. I was like, wow, what a lie that the enemy could get into. Now, whether that was their flesh or the world, but the enemy's certainly behind that lie.
With you, or were they having their own internal conflict?
They were having their own internal conflict as it played out. I think they were hurting for us and they couldn't make sense of it because I was in full-time ministry. So how could this happen to me? And so in some way there was some of that prosperity gospel, or at least virtue prosperity gospel, where if I do good, I get good. And so it freaked them out. And so there is some of that God owes me, virtue, like they said, like that virtue prosperity-ish kind of gospel. If I do good, only good's going to happen. So, but it is interesting. I thought to me, I've always had this visual picture that when someone's suffering, there's multiple causes always. And we want to be agnostic initially to the causes, but be aware of Satan's battle for the person, even if they stand strong and have good theology at the beginning, especially when something's chronic. It can wear you down, so if it's chronic illness or chronic disability or divorce, you might handle it really well when your spouse betrays you at the beginning. But coming alongside people when the suffering goes long is when I think the lies can come in, because we want to be out of pain so badly that I think we become vulnerable. And this kind of brings up a big question I have for you, and that is discerning between warfare and sinfulness and just life in a broken world, human weakness. Like, just how do you do that even as a pastor when somebody is coming to you and something's going on? Do you have some ways in which you discern? Most of the time there's not one category, but there might be a larger door to enter into in someone's world, right?
Yeah.
Is this warfare? Is it human weakness? Is it life in a broken world? Is it sin?
Yeah. Most of the time when people sit down,
like when they feel tormented.
Yeah.
Specifically.
The question they're not presenting with is, sorry, that's a weird double negative. They don't come to me and say, help me figure out what the source is of this pain. Most of the time, fair. They come to me and they've already assumed there is a source of pain. Right? So it's
you want to start there.
It's like, hey, I think I'm being demonized, or man, I think I really messed up and God's punishing me, or I think God's abandoned me. Right? They come with some kind of presenting theory.
That's true.
Most of the time, and I think my role as kind of like the mirror of pastoral counseling is to kind of reflect back, and kind of explore with them kind of a greater reality than they're just myopically focused on. And so if it's
Jeff will love that, myopically focused.
He's a myopically focused guy, is it?
Because optometrist, yeah. He always likes it when you use myopic.
Really? Good to know. So I think that's, and so then part of it too is like this wisdom discernment of just every once in a while I'm meeting with someone, it's like, oh yeah, Satan's out to get me. And it's like, I feel like there's something going on. I think, if I meet with a couple, it's like, I think there's something going on with this guy. He won't make eye contact with me. I bet there's actually some behavior in here and it's not just a demonic attack.
Right.
That, because we're all messed up people. We are. With a combination of messed up things in us and a system in us and in our relationships that keep us in the place that we are. And so it's like, picture a world where this guy's having an affair. He doesn't want to talk about it. She's talking about how it's satanic because she probably has thought he's having an affair, but doesn't want to entertain that thought. So she's decided it's a spiritual thing. It's like, okay, I think I know what's happening here. I think you're scared to face reality. You refuse to face reality. And now I got to see if I can help you wade into reality. Usually it's not that cut and dried where it's I'm not the guy who's God told me that you're having an affair. I feel like some pastors do that, and it's really just they're trying to throw things against the wall, see if something sticks.
That sounds like taking the Lord's name in vain, as we were talking about that in the sermon review.
Yes. And so I think people are normally presenting with, here's what's going on, and here's my theory about why.
And they're asking you to weigh in on their theory.
Yeah. Do you
If
agree
they're-
with my theory,
yeah.
or, help my husband believe, or help my wife believe my theory is correct? And, some people like this, some people don't. Like, most of the time what I'm doing is like, well, let's take a wider look at this thing. Like, and so sometimes it's just straight ministry to people. Like, hey, you know what? Like, you are saved because of what Jesus has done. Do you have sin in your life? These are rhetorical questions. Like, no. It's like, God is not bringing punishment because like in 5th grade, you stole a candy bar and now it's like for the rest of your life, you're going to be like, you've made that up. Like, that's not a real thing. But hey, yeah, if there's patterns of sin in your life, let's deal with those, because that can be a place, And so a lot of that is just like listening and sharing, and then providing just, and as almost like a spiritual director, just asking the Lord in the midst of that conversation, okay, what can you help me to see that maybe they can't see? And so that's like just more of a basic counseling, like that Johari window technique of like, there are some things that they can see that I can't see. There are some things that I can see they can't see. There's something that's plain to everybody. So it's like, part of what I try to do in that room is like, is there anything that I can see that they can't? Because they've invited me into this conversation to give my perspective. Yeah, so sometimes I'm like, hey, can I just give you an outside perspective? I don't know your life. I don't know all the the things behind the scenes, but it feels like to me this. It's ironically,
could that be true?
Yeah, sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, you're totally right. Other times, like, that's absolutely false. Say, okay. It's the funny thing is when they say that's absolutely false, that's usually what it is, right? But
it's the ones that are like, I don't know, but let me think about it.
But I always feel like, hey, that's all part of the process. It's like, hey, maybe it's,
and quite often it's a combination of things. It's not one thing, but I have noticed, at least for me, and if I say, is there unconfessed sin, I get less traction than, are you experiencing guilt? Is there an experience of guilt? Because that seems to be open up a door more. What is feeling weighty? What feels, but sometimes you actually can get some really good stuff when you say, is there something you need to confess?
It just depends. Part of that just depends on who you're talking to.
It's just so hard when they're suffering because you don't want to add to the pain.
Well, it's like, yes, that's not a question I normally ask to someone who's just suffering, but it is a question I'll ask to someone who's like, either they're convinced that their sin is causing this issue. I'm like, okay, well, what is this sin? Tell me what it is.
Okay.
Or it's someone who's really just trying to explore like all the options. Like, all right, well, let's explore the options. Let's hit them, And so, that's good. I think, most of us all of us around here are not people who are trying to heap guilt on people or whatever, but that is what people generally present with, is like guilt, shame, question, doubt. It's like, and that's just, there's all this pressure coming at us wherever the source is, and it leaks out somewhere. And so it's going to be guilt or shame or denial or
fear,
faithlessness or something, fear.
Well, kind of connected, especially to the demoniac, is how do we discern between mental health challenges, trauma, and spiritual oppression without minimizing any of them?
Yeah, part of it I would quickly say, it's not our job to diagnose people.
Yeah.
I think, but recognizing that these things tend to be integrated.
They do.
Helps us to just take a wider view, so it's like, I think that is kind of when we talk about the problematic way that people deal with this stuff, part of that is because they do become more myopically focused on one thing, right? So it's like, you're a sinner. Oh, you got to, it's like, here's your magic pill. And it's, I think I say that in counseling all the time. It's like, hey, these things are integrated. It's, I'm not the person who's like, oh, well, you have cancer. Like, do you have sin in your life? That just feels like, wait, why are you coming at me with that sword right now? But at the same time, if someone's coming in like, man, I've got this disease. Why, God? Why? It's like, part of it's just getting to the bottom. Like, hey, why are you feeling the way you're feeling? This seems like suffering. This doesn't seem like sin. I don't think that we see in the scriptures that God just gives you cancer when you mess up. Just feels like a quick, big leap. So I'm guessing this is a suffering thing, not a sin thing. So I'm probably going to come alongside you with compassion in your suffering and walk with you and see how can I support you, pray for you. At the same time, keep my eyes open to hey, there is spiritual stuff here. And it's like, God, if there's something going on that, it's like I've heard bonkers stories of people who are suffering with an illness, and then it turns out later they've got all this sin in their life. And it's just okay, that stuff's integrated. But part of it's I don't think God has sent me in a Ghostbuster with my little meter to figure out exactly what's happening. But at the same time, it's my hope would be like by them entering into conversation with spirit-filled people, if there is anything, right? Like what James says, if there's sin, it'll be forgiven.
Right.
Like if there is anything in their lives, like it's going to come out organically through those conversations. I don't think it's our job to like interrogate their issue, but really to explore it with them. And when it just feels like on face value, it's a suffering issue, not a sin issue, then we're like, well, when someone's suffering, you suffer with them, you bring compassion to them, you pray for them, you ask if you can support them. And it's like you assume that they're being honest. And like if you find out later there's a bunch of garbage going on in their life, it's like, well, hey, we can work with this.
Let's work with that. I think where it gets the trickiest, and this is where I really appreciate being here for two reasons, is mental illness. And the first reason I appreciate being here is this is a very safe place for people who battle mental illness. I'll never forget the first time I taught the women when I had just been on staff just a couple of years now, and it was my first week, and there was a woman shouting out during my whole message. And what I loved is nobody like tried to, harm her in any way or stop her even really. They had compassion. And I was like, I like this place. So we seem to be a safe place for people who are battling mental illness. What I also love about being here is that we have a wide understanding that there is a physiology to mental illness. It's not all spiritual. There are segments of Christianity that kind of look at all mental illness as it must be demonic, or somebody's invited demonic in, or it's a demonic torment of some sort. However, that does make it a little more complicated to figure out. And I think you've spoken to this before, but I think it'd be helpful for our listeners to hear, like when you experienced maybe a very clear mental illness, how you discern when there might be a demonic component to it. Yeah. Do you remember talking about that before? I thought that was really interesting.
You can fill in the gaps if I don't.
Well, you were talking about the way they present, the way they like if we run into one of our fellow image bearer humans who are shouting, for instance, but they're shouting something vile and evil versus just shouting, talking to themselves in general, like maybe those are some indicators. Do you remember talking about that at all?
I don't, but I mean,
sounds good, huh?
Yeah. Well, if
it doesn't sound good, you didn't say it. But.
Well, I think what I remember is like I notice sometimes that there is kind of weird or offensive spiritual content.
Yes,
right?
that's what you were saying.
Again, that's still not like a black and white thing.
No,
it's like
but it's
someone
helpful.
Have like Tourette's or something, and it's like they just end up saying the most obscene things. Like, and that's part of the trigger there. But it is. I think more of me at an observational level, being like, man, so this person presents like they have a mental illness, but why is it that they're talking about like God and angels and Satan? Like, why is that how
the primary
their mental illness manifests? And again, it's like, you don't know. It could be how their mental illness manifests, but that feels interesting to me, that the thing that is coming out of your mouth is always spiritual stuff, or it's disgusting stuff, or whatever it is. Like, this feels evil. Where it's, I think that's, it's, I don't know if it's our job to diagnose those things, but I think, again, just like the sin and sickness thing and all of that, like there is like some level of vulnerable risk we have to take as friends or ministry leaders with someone, where in the same way that it's like, if you're exploring something with someone, there is a way to get into like, hey, is there sin in your life, without making it sound like you're the person who's like, well, your child has a disability because there's sin in your life, in trusted relationship. And there's also like, I think of times in my life where it's like I'm praying for someone and I feel like this feels demonic. I'm just going to go there and ask you. Like, sometimes I'm just like, God, if there's anything that's, sometimes I use coded language and hope just me and God can talk about it, and the person who doesn't get offended by eavesdropping. But if there's anything that's entering into this person's life that's causing them distress, we pray that you would take that away, that you would release them from that. It's like, this is more like spiritual, demonic, like casting out language. And intent than merely like give them comfort and healing from their sickness, or teach them how to manage it or whatever. And so sometimes there's risks there, but it's like, I think I'm always very sensitive of like, I'm not going to be the guy who's just trying to cast out demons from someone, but I'm also not, I want to make sure that I'm not ignoring
it.
Yeah.
And was something I remember learning that was really helpful for me too is like when it's more complicated, we can kind of panic. Like what if it's mental illness as well as demonic torment together? But the reality is if there's multiple causes, there's multiple helpers. And so, I think similarly, like how can it possibly hurt? I remember Hannah and I sitting with a gal who was hearing voices, and the voices were very destructive. And so praying with her, not only for her physical health and mental soundness, but also praying that if the enemy is telling her lies, in Jesus' name, so it's like both, we can now find the right mental health professionals for her as well as pray for her soul. And so, I don't know, for some reason that really like brought down my anxiety of trying to figure it out, or, oh no, what if there's multiple components? Well, we just can widen, hopefully, the circle of care for people. But anyway, I'm really grateful to be in a place. I feel like Three Crosses is so diverse in multiple ways, but it's also diverse even in terms of mental health, which I think is a real blessing to us as a church. Okay, so we'll land this plane. I know you got to go probably and ready to start working on your next sermon. But anyway.
That's right.
I wanted to kind of land with this idea, and maybe I'm reading too much into the text, and you can say so. But it doesn't seem like the man in Mark 5 is even asking for help, really. Jesus just delivers him. And I just feel like it seems like it says much to me about God's initiative in rescuing people. And then we can kind of see that in Jesus' ministry, that he doesn't go demon hunting. They're all ones that he comes upon, or they're brought to him. And I think there's some interesting applications for us. And I'm guessing, the question I'm asking is, what would you say to all of us as far as joining Jesus and seeing people who are tormented find freedom? Like, are there some applications for us in not just recognizing our own access, but how do we move towards people that we sense they're being tormented?
Yeah, the word that keeps coming up in this conversation is compassion. And this idea of compassion is like, man, you see somebody and they're suffering or they're struggling or whatever it is, and it's like, man, I feel for them. I want to. Is there some way I can help them? Yeah. And I think compassion is always a good starting point, because when compassion leads to thoughtful action, beautiful things happen. I think when not beautiful things happen, it's usually when like we short circuit the compassion, right? And so it's like,
harm.
You see like a
can
person on the streets, and it's just like, I'm going to save that person. It's like, well, hold on. Like, why don't you start by feeling for that person and asking God, like, is there anything that you would have me to do in this scenario? Not just like going to like rescue them. At the same time, like with this story, it's really interesting because Jesus walks past people who are struggling from sickness or struggling from demonic oppression or demonization. And he'll ask them things like, hey, do you want to get well? Or what do you want? So there's like a discernment factor. This one, it's like you said, he just goes in there and solves it.
Amazing.
And it feels more, especially as we talked earlier about what this man in the Gerasenes was experiencing.
How could he even ask for help?
It feels more like Jesus comes along like down the street, and there's like a gang that's like beating up a kid or something. And he's like, hey, get out of here. Gets rid of all these people, then like grabs this person and brings them to safety and healing and all that. So it does feel like there's a discernment factor too. It's like you feel for this person, but it's like we all know, it's, you see somebody who's drowning in a lake and you're like, well, I don't want to just assume that I could just swoop in there and save them. It's like, you might need to swoop in there and save them, right? And so I think part of compassion and discernment and wisdom and walking by the Spirit is knowing, when is compassion swooping in and saving someone? And when is it inappropriate to try to swoop in, I'm making quotes if you're just listening, swoop in and save somebody. And Jesus was very good at knowing when to do what. Like, he's not, on one hand, Jesus helps people retain their agency. That's something we talk about here a lot, that you've taught us to talk about a lot. And so, hey, what do you want? Do you want to get well, right? What is your desire? And Jesus comes and has responses to their desire. But it's like, you're talking to someone who's getting beat up. It's like, yes, there's a time and a place to say, like, I know first aid, can I help? But other times, like, you just got to help. They're unconscious or they're being, victimized or whatever. It's like, you just got to jump in there. And so,
it made me think of the Good Samaritan and like, okay, the robbers are demons, basically, that have left this guy bloody and on the side of the road. It's interesting. Yeah.
And it's like, and that's, the guy seems like he's passed out on the side of the road. What is he, half dead? I think there's like a clinical term around that in Jewish culture. And so it's like, this guy's like unresponsive. So it's like,
of course,
the guy's, he's going to help him. Like he's going to pick this guy up, put him on his horse. And this is not him kidnapping a guy against his will. It's not him like, deciding he's going to heal somebody. It's like, this guy needs a rescuer.
Right.
And so on one hand, everyone needs a rescuer. On the other hand, I do think even Jesus modeled we don't want to have a savior complex. He was the savior.
And he didn't have one.
He knew how to wisely walk through issues to give people as much agency in their own lives as possible while being the literal savior. And I think we can learn from that is, just asking folks, I think part of that's just maturity. I was on the phone with the guy today and just going through a hard time, suffering. I have some advice for him. Don't know if he wants to take it or not. But really it's just like, hey, is there anything I can do to help you, serve you in this season? And he's like, well, just pray for me. So I was like, okay, I can do that. Where I feel like maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I'm like, well, hey, I'm going to come over right now and I'm going to fix this and I'm going to help you get a job. And I'm going to say, well, he's not asking for any of that.
He's not asking.
He just wants you to pray for him.
Yeah.
And he wants me to be with him while he's suffering. There's someone who's out there thinking about him that he can call when he's having a hard day. That's what he wants. So I don't need to live his life for him. He does not ask me to do that. And even if he was, I'd probably be like, it's not my job to live your life for you. I want to mobilize him to live his life for him.
But,
so he didn't need a rescuer. He just wanted to call me almost like a friend to listen to him, pray for him, and encourage him that I just told him stuff that he already knew. And that's what I'm sure he needed and wanted, was just to be reminded, hey, I know you believe, I've heard you say this before, that God is going to work this out. I know it's hard to believe that in this season. But I think you're right. And I think you can trust in the faithfulness of God from your past, because we've talked about that a lot. So just reminding him, kind of putting that mirror up again and being there with compassion, but not, swooping in to rescue someone who's not asking to be rescued.
Yeah. I appreciate he reached out to you. And so I think it was said last week on the podcast that probably our people who listen to the podcast are super users of Three Crosses.
They love it.
So I'm thinking, while most of us are asking the question, how much access does Satan have to me? Many of us are also asking the question, what do I do when I think he's had access to someone I love? And I think what I love about what you're saying is we don't need to be worried that we are being called to go out there and figure it out. It's who are the people God is bringing into our life? And we have been given all authority, so we can move towards, there's no specific person or incantation or one way to see people freed from torment. If we have somebody in our life, or we come across somebody who is hurting, and we sense there might be a spiritual aspect to it, we can seek the help of the community to come alongside us as we come alongside them, and not either run or rescue. We don't have to run away from or get in and fix it. We can just move towards, move towards. As Christians, we do it like Jesus. We move towards trouble, right? The trouble that's in front of us. We don't go find it. We don't go casting the demons out of everywhere. But when you've been told 4 times there's a demon on your roof, then it's probably time to take care of that demon on your roof.
You got to do something about it.
You got to do something about it. So anyway, there's so much more we would love to pick your brain on, but I also want to be sensitive to your time and the time of our listeners. So any summary that you would here's what I really want everyone to go home with that maybe that we haven't said, or
I think the passage that sticks out to me is, greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. And I think as we're talking about this question of how much access does the enemy have to us, it is true that Satan has limited access to us through a couple of vehicles that can give him limited access to us. Satan has limited access to us as believers. We have unlimited access to God as believers. And so part of God is more powerful than the enemy, but part of it is we have more access to God than Satan has to us. And so any moment... You
say that again.
We have greater access to God than Satan has access to us.
That's important.
And so I think part of it is, there's not a quick solution to most of these things that we've talked about on this podcast today, but it's hey, when you've sinned and you've given access to Satan, you still have unlimited access to go before the Father because of the work of Jesus, and he intercedes for us as we bring our prayers to him by the power of the Spirit. We we have that access. We can use that access to, next week we'll talk about living in the armor of God, but we also talk about that tension of like, our God is a strong tower. We can run into him and find salvation there. And so putting on that armor, part of that is the idea that no matter where you are in the world, it's not like you got to run back to church to find Jesus. His armor is available too. You can get into protected space by stepping into his presence immediately. So it doesn't solve all your problems in an instant. Like your sickness doesn't go away, your suffering doesn't go away, like the results of your actions don't go away. But you might, Satan finds limited access to us, but we have unlimited access to God, regardless of where we are in the journey.
That's such an important place to land. I think that's just huge that, we have unlimited access. So even back to that first question that I was asking our listeners to consider, where is there an area in your life where you're experiencing darkness or some sense of opposition? What is your experience of God's presence also? And be able to really ask the Spirit to help you recognize that whatever access darkness has to you, you have more access to the very presence of God. I think that's a huge, just blessing.
Like if you're a child in good relationships with good parents, and like you're an adult child, like you might be living in some house, apartment, whatever. It's like your roof is leaking. It's like, oh geez, like there's gross stuff coming into my house. It's like, you can call your parents. And if you've got like good parents, they'd be like, hey, I'll come over. We'll see if we can figure this out together. Like you have access to your parents. You can invite them in to come solve this problem. Sometimes like it feels like all hell breaks loose, like literally like in your life. And it's like the roof caves in. It's like, and your parents might be like, hey, you can come move in with me for a while, like, and so part of it is like, we have this heavenly Father who sometimes when we're experiencing these moments of darkness, he can step into our life with us and help us to solve these things or solve them for us. But other times, man, we're going through stuff that's like, we just have to go and like rest in him for a while. It's like, like, I can't even live my life out there. I'm going to have to go like just abide in Jesus in this community with these trusted relationships. And like, I just got to heal up for a while. So I think there are times where like God comes into our space and helps us in our time of need. There are other times it feels like, and I know it's an analogy, but it feels like we just got to move back in with Jesus for a while. Yeah. And it's like, this one's going to take a while to heal from.
Or remember that he actually like owns the house and already lives there.
Exactly.
We've just forgotten.
Yeah.
We put him in the basement or something.
In Jesus' time, it was multi-generational dwelling. And so that's maybe the world that
maybe that's the world we live in. Yeah. All right. Well, do you want to send our listeners off with maybe a blessing?
Oh, well, yes. Thank you for listening. I think that, as we talk through this topic, my burden for us as a people is that we would really deeply believe that greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. And whether we're experiencing the acuteness of pain or suffering that comes from all these terrible things we've talked about, or if we're doubting or we're scared or whatever it is, our next step can be to go to the Lord. And sometimes going to the Lord is going to the Lord by going to someone who knows him and talking to him with someone else. But if you ever feel like you're isolated out there on an island alone, being picked on by the enemy, I think that analogy is a lie. Like, I don't think you're as alone as you think, but I do think the enemy wants to make you feel isolated and alone. So stay connected with the Lord, stay connected with God's people, and just know that this is a place where reach out. We'd love to process these things with you as you walk through life.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Well,
Thanks for having me.
with that, thanks for coming. And next week, AJ will be back.
We'll see if AJ will be back. I don't know. He might have just got replaced the last 2 weeks.
In the podcast seat. He'll be right here. He'll be tall enough to not get covered by a giant microphone. So thanks for joining us.
See you next time.